Welcome to Tucson in June. It's like the surface of the sun outside. It's like Luke Skywalker on Tatooine. It's miserable, it's hot, it's brutal. It doesn't cool off at night either. My plan was to make that Ancient Pottery Challenge Oya video, and I got started on it twice. The first one, I used the wrong clay, didn't have enough wet strength, it started slumping. I gave up, squished it all up. Second time, it was just so hot, I couldn't do it in the day. I thought, I'm gonna make this pot at night. So I waited till 9 o'clock at night to start the pot. Got the walls, I don't know, a good 4 inches above the pookie. And I was soaking wet from sweat. Miserable, uncomfortable. And then, of course, in that kind of environment, you're not doing your best work. I found myself being sloppy because I was anxious to get it done because it was so hot. So once again, squished the whole pot up, threw it back in the bag. I'm not going to be able to make that Oya video until it's cool enough. Today I'm going to talk about the basics of coil pottery, specifically coil pottery for beginners. So some really basic coil pottery lessons for those of you who have no experience and are interested in getting started in coil pottery. Okay, let me talk briefly about the tools I'm going to be using today. This is a gourd rib tool. You can use any rib tool. If you don't have a gourd rib available, you could use a metal or a rubber rib, which are available at any arts and craft supply store. I also have a video on how to make a gourd rib. I'll put the link to that right up here for you in case you're interested. Now I have two different work boards. Let me explain. First of all, these are unfinished plywood. That is, they're sanded smooth, but they don't have a finish like polyurethane or anything on them, which would make them unabsorbent. I want them to absorb moisture. That way, any clay that sticks on it will eventually dry and lift off. If you use a surface, like the surface of my desk here is finished with some sort of polyurethane or some kind of impervious surface to keep moisture from soaking into it, which is nice, but if you're working with clay, it can get stuck on there really good. So it's not the best surface for working with clay on. So the larger board is where I can pad out slabs, I can roll coils. It's a place where I have a little more room to work, okay? The smaller one is going to be where I'm put the base of the pot. So I'll leave the pot, I will build the pot on top of this, and this will allow me to turn the pot and work on it. If I build the pot on this big board, it'll be hard to turn it and get to different angles. So this is for building the pot on, this is for rolling coils or flattening slabs on, all right? I have a small lump of clay. Now this looks like a big domino or a dice right now, but I put those holes in it and I filled them with water so that this clay could soak up a little extra moisture while it was in that container. And then I have a container of water because I'll be adding water to the clay as I work. I'll be wetting my rib tool. The only other thing I keep here is a rag to clean my hands off on because I'm indoors. Before I can leave the room, I have to open the door and I don't want to put clay all over it. So this will be one way to kind of just clean the excess clay off my hands before I have to touch something electronic or a doorknob or something like that. And the last thing I'm going to need is something round to form the base of my pot. So I'm just going to place this over the slab of clay and cut. That way I get a nice round circle for the bottom of my pot. You can use anything that is the diameter you want the base of your pot to be. So to start with, I'm just going to tear off a piece of my clay and I'm just going to pat out a little pancake of clay. If you ever seen an old Mexican woman making tortillas, it's something like that. Just pat it down. You're looking for about a 1/4 inch of thickness, but it's not rocket science. If you're over, that's okay. If you're a little under, that's okay. Press that down onto your board and place whatever round element you're going to use to form the base of your pot over it. And then use something sharp. I'm using a butter knife here. It doesn't have to be super sharp. To just trace around that element and form a circle. It's stuck to my cup. Stuck pretty good too. Okay. This material can be wadded up and added back into the lump. Remember that I said that the small board is for the base of my pot. So I want to place this pretty much center of that small board. Now I'm ready to start coiling. If you're wanting to form a traditional Southwest pot, like I usually do, you may want to use a pookie. I've got a video about pookies that you can see over here if you're curious about that. But that's for making a round bottom pot. Today, we're just doing coiling for beginners, so we're gonna keep it real simple and make a flat bottom pot. Now I'm ready to roll my first coil. I take that lump of clay and I roll it between my palms until I have a fat cylinder. And then I can put it on my workboard and start pressing it down and rolling that coil longer. I want it to be about 1 inch in thickness. I've probably got more clay here than I need, so I'm gonna tear off some of this. Once I've got my coil to a nice consistent thickness, I'm ready to attach it to the base. So I'm just going to place it around the edge of my pot base. And then, as you see, I've got a little excess. I'm just going to tear this off and put it back in the lump. You can see here that I'm sitting right over the top of the base. I'm not overlapping the outside of that base. I'm going to come around and I'm going to perform the first of the 3 important pinches I'm going to teach you today. This is called the bonding pinch. I'm just taking my index finger and I'm pressing it down, firmly down and into the base to attach it. A lot of people that teach pottery coiling teach that you need to score and slip every time you attach a coil. But this bonding pinch is really the key. You don't need to score and slip unless that clay, the clay you're attaching it to, has dried significantly. But what you do need to make sure of is that that coil is firmly bonded to the base. And you can see now I've gone all the way around. There's not an area not bonded. The inside is still just a raw seam. Now I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to perform the second of the 3 important pinches I'm going to teach you today. And this is called the flat pinch. In this case, I'm merely pinching my forefinger and thumb together, flattening the clay. Because as you can see, the walls of my pot, if they were the thickness of my coil, would be quite thick. I'm going to decrease the thickness of this significantly by using the flat pinch. And I just slowly make my way around the pot, pinching the clay thinner. And as I do it, I'm thinning the walls, but I'm also heightening the walls. I'm bringing that clay up so that I'm getting more height out of that coil than the thickness of the coil. Okay? So now I've gone all the way around. I'll probably pinch it thinner than this. It's still a little over 1/4 inch. But I'm going to teach you the third of the 3 critical pinches to coiling pottery, and that is the compression pinch. So remember, the bonding pinch was that firmly pressing down and in to bond the coil. The flat pinch was bringing your forefinger and your thumb together to flatten that coil. The compression pinch actually requires both hands. You do a flat pinch with both and then slightly bring them together. And that, because if you go around the pot and just flat pinch, it tends to go out. It tends to come out in kind of a flower pot shape. So by doing that compression, just pulling it together a little bit, making little clay pleats, you actually can keep those walls of your pot coming up vertically. That's also how you would bring it in to make a jar. So once you come up as much as you want and you want to bring it into a neck, you need to compress a lot as you work your way around to bring that clay closer and closer together to make the circumference of your circle narrower, more restricted. So I'm just coming around and I'm pinching and I'm compressing a little bit. I'm using those 2 pinches together to bring the walls of my pot thinner and higher and in a vertical fashion. And now you can see the walls of my pot are about as thick as I'm going to want them to be. I have a couple of things to work on now. the outside where I attach the coil, there's kind of a thick area. Now, I can just take my knife and trim that off now. I could do it later, but I'm thinking about it now. And also, the clay is softer now. If I wait, it's only going to get firmer. Now I'm going to work on this seam on the inside. I'm going to take my rib tool and I'm going to get it damp in my water bucket. I'm going to knock off any excess water so that it's not soaking wet, but damp. And then I'm going to come around inside and just smooth that seam out. So now that I've dealt with this coil, I've pinched it thin, I've pinched it up, I've smoothed it on the outside. I'm going to go ahead and add another coil. Now I could smooth it on the outside as well. You can see I've got some rough areas where I cut that base off. But I usually like to get a couple of coils on before I start smoothing the outside. So let me roll another coil real quick. And just like the first time, I'm going to set that coil right on top of the pot wall. As you can see, I've got a little excess. I'm going to trim that off. And then I'm going to start doing my bonding pinch. As I come around doing the bonding pinch, I'm also going to make sure that that coil is right where I want it to be. Because if it starts coming more in, that'll affect the shape of the pot. Or if it starts going more out. So I'm going to make sure it's right on top of the wall as I go around. Okay, I've got that coil attached. Now it's time to start doing my flat and compression pinches to bring that up. Now at this point, you probably also want to start thinking about the shape you want your pot to be. I'm going to make something of a flower vase today because it's a simple shape, especially for a person who is just beginning with coil. It makes a great present. So sometimes when you're first starting out making pottery, you want to use the pottery you're making as a gift. So you could make this and give it to your grandmother or your wife or whoever you love. A flower vase makes a great gift. And like I said, it's a fairly easy shape to make. Now as I'm coming around, I'm pinching flat and I'm pinching a little so that what I'm making is a bit of a cylinder. I'm paying special attention to the thickness of my walls because I want to make sure that the walls of my pot are a fairly consistent 1/4 inch all the way through. Now as you work with clay, you'll become more comfortable with feeling the clay between your fingers and estimating how thick it is. That's something that you'll learn or acquire as you work with clay, and it doesn't always come naturally to beginners. Again, I'm going to make sure that my rib is damp, but not soaking, not dripping wet, because I don't want to add that much moisture to the clay. Being damp, though, will help it to glide along the clay more easily, and it will keep that clay from drying out so much. Now, this time as I come around, I'm pressing it out a little bit. So I want to give the pot a little bit of a rounded shape. So I'm using the rounded edge of my rib to press out, and I'm using this hand to hold in place to make sure I don't press too much. And then I can just rotate it easily because it's on this small board. It's easy to just rotate it with my hand as I work. The other thing I'm going to do at this time is I'm going to start scraping the outside smooth as well. And I'm using my hand on the inside of the pot to keep from pressing it out of shape too much. And just bringing it up. You could also scrape down if that's easier for you. An upward motion is easier for me. Okay, so I've gone all the way around and smoothed the outside. When you scrape the outside, you sometimes lose some of the shape that you might be going for. So it sometimes helps to come back on the inside and kind of remold it a little. By now, hopefully you're getting the hang of this. Rolling coils and pinching them should eventually become muscle memory, so you don't have to think about it. So I've got the coil setting on top of the wall, and I'm going to come around with my bonding pinch again, attaching that coil firmly to the base of the pot. I'll show you what it looks like. So now I've got a nice fat coil on there. I can start pinching it up. And as before, I'm using my flat pinch, bringing my fingers together, and I'm using a little bit of that compression pinch, bringing the two flat pinches and then pulling them together slightly. Okay. And then coming in with my damp but not wet rib tool and scraping the inside to obliterate that seam and smooth the surface of the inside of my pot. And now coming around and scraping the outside. And now with that done, again, I've lost some of my shape, so I'm going to come around and smooth the inside again. So I'm thinking maybe 2 more coils. End up with a height somewhere in here. Now this time, I'm placing the coil a little towards the inside of the pot. And that is because I'm bringing the shape in at this point. So that'll help me lean in the direction I want to go. Now I'm ready to start doing my flat and compression pinches to bring this thinner and up higher and also in as I'm coming. So I'm trying to come in as I go. So I'm doing a little more compression at this point than I was on the last coil. So if you're learning something today and you enjoy this style of video-based education, you might enjoy my online master classes. I have a whole comprehensive class about coil pottery making. I also have classes on finding and processing natural clay, finding and using natural pigments to decorate your pottery, and outdoor pottery firing. They're not that expensive and they cover the entire process quite well. So those are on my website at ancientpottery.how. I'll put the link down in the description and also on the screen here in case you're interested. Okay. Now, as the mouth starts to constrict, it gets a little more difficult to get inside and scrape. I'm using 2 fingers to just kind of reach in, holding that scraper out inside there to scrape that wall. And of course, keeping this hand on the outside to make sure I don't push it too far out of shape. And now scrape the outside. Okay, now once you scrape the outside, of course, you have to go back in on the inside because you always ruin the shape scraping the outside. Okay, I think I'm doing okay on the shape. See what you think. Okay, I'm just going to put 1 more coil on, and I'm going to bring it in a little more, and then I'm going to flare it out a little bit. And that'll be a nice little vase. Again, just like the last time, I'm going to set that coil towards the inside of the pot wall so that it's leaning in the direction I'm wanting to build, because I am bringing it in a little more. So rip off that excess. I'm going to leave a little bit. I'll probably tear off more before I'm done. I'm going to be especially careful at this point and do a lot of compression because I don't want that coming up at all. I want to keep it coming in. Now I'm going to leave the top unfinished for now. Eventually I'm going to flare that out, but I'm going to do my scraping first because I'm probably going to distort that rim trying to reach in and make sure everything's good. And then once I shape the rim, I want to be able to leave it and not have to come back and reform that. So you can see my rib tool just barely fits in, and it's really not doing any good. So I'm going to get a spoon for doing that. I think in the meantime, I will scrape the outside. Now I can slide 2 fingers inside, make sure I don't push myself too far out of the shape I want. And gently scrape the outside to get rid of that coil seam. So a spoon is going to give me a little more reach down in there for scraping that inside and pressing it out. So not only am I scraping, trying to get rid of that seam where the coil was attached, but I'm also paying careful attention to the shape, the outside shape of the pot, pressing out where it needs to come out, because I want to keep this a little bit rounded as it comes up to the neck. Okay, I think that's pretty good. It's not perfect, but the one thing you need to keep in mind about hand building pottery like this is it's not going to be perfect. In fact, it's the inconsistencies. It's the little parts that aren't perfect that gives it that human touch, that makes it feel like it wasn't made on a machine or it wasn't made in a factory, but it is truly handmade. It makes this art form more charming, more appealing to us as humans. I'm just going to come around, and because I've got a little excess here in the top, and I'm just going to kind of start pinching this out a little bit. I'm probably going to need to add a very small coil to get this where I want it. Let me get my knife back here, and I can just eyeball this and trim off the high points. Like I said, it's not rocket science. It does not have to be perfect. But you can control the level of wonkiness too. I'm going to roll myself a nice small coil for the rim. And then I'm just going to place this. And this time, I'm placing the coil towards the outside of the pot wall because I'm wanting to flare this out a little bit. So I'm always leaning my coil in the direction I'm wanting to build. And then pinching it up with a little bit of a flat pinch and a little bit of a compression pinch, because this time I want it to come out. And you should be able to see that flare starting to form there, that outward flare. I'll get my scraper and I'll just very gently start scraping that seam away. And then with my spoon, scraping that inside seam away. Okay, now I'm ready to shape the rim and be done. So I'm getting my fingers nice and wet in my water. And I'm just going to wet that clay on the rim real good so that I can kind of mold it between my thumb and forefinger. Now there's some places that are a little higher or a little lower, and if I get that clay nice and wet, I can just kind of move it around with my fingers. And sometimes you need to add a little extra or trim a little away, and that's okay too. I'm going to add a little in some places here, but very, very little. It doesn't take much on a rim to make a huge difference. And next thing you know, you'll have a lump where you had a hole before. So be careful as you do that you don't overdo it. Okay, so there it is. I hope you got something out of this video today. Learned something about coil pottery making. If you're just starting out in coil pottery making, I've got a lot of videos that you can learn from. One's about how to get started in pottery for cheap, or videos about coil pottery tips and tricks. So check those out. That's aside from all the classes that I have on my website. If you're interested in going more in depth in learning about coil pottery making, check out my website where I've got some more in-depth material. I've got classes and lessons, workshops, things like that. If you're interested in learning some more about coil pottery making right now, check out this video over here. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.